My guest today is the fabulous Ellen Busch. At an early age, Ellen was diagnosed with dyslexia and as a result was given an academic death sentence. In a split second, her self-esteem was destroyed and her potential evaporated. How did your parents shape from the moment where the school's like, yeah, your child's no good? How did they react?
They were in a parent-teacher conference and the administrator sat them down and said, your daughter is dyslexic. I'm very sorry. College is out of the question. She might be able to graduate from high school, but you should really focus on finding her a husband who will take care of her because she won't be contributing to society other than as a wife and a mother. So find a good husband for her to take care of her. Now, I was 6 or 7 years old, and that parent-teacher conference ended with my mother pounding her fist on the desk saying, "I refuse to allow you to condemn my daughter." So that's where it started.
How do you explain that to people? Because I still have a hard time explaining to people how to find your purpose. But I ask people because one day I know somebody's going to say something that will resonate with everyone.
So after I escaped from my ex-husband, and I literally had to plan and execute an escape, I was trying to put my life back together and just nothing was going right for me. And I was traumatized. I was driving through stop signs and red lights. I was so traumatized, and I reached my surrender point. I just looked up at the sky and said, I don't know what else to do. I'm turning myself over to you. And that instant, things started to get better.
If you were to use a single word or a short sentence to give that to people to just keep in the back of their heads for when things get rough, what would that be?
We are 20 times more capable than we realize we are.
Welcome to Compassiviste Dialogues. I'm your host, Ali Horiat. My goal in this program is to educate our audience about various global issues and how we can help. My guest today is the fabulous Ellen Busch. At an early age, Ellen was diagnosed with dyslexia and as a result was given an academic death sentence. In a split second, her self-esteem was destroyed and her potential evaporated. Despite these challenges, or as she puts it, in spite of them, Ellen's parents championed her education outside the classroom by teaching her how to pilot her father's boat and how to navigate, understand, and respect the ocean. They enabled Ellen to participate in team sports, to go on a 2-week outward bound program, and made it possible for her to get certified in scuba diving at the age of 17. As a young adult, becoming an expert skier and ski instructor, Ellen fell in love with adventure and the challenges it brought. Mastering these skills enabled her to preserve and empower her dreams to earn both a bachelor's and a master's degree, all with dyslexia. Ellen still suffered from low self-esteem and was consistently underemployed, as well as a regular target of bullies and predators. After escaping an abusive marriage, Ellen faced her trauma head-on and the belief systems that had been holding her back. Even with the sudden loss of her parents, who were relentless in their support for Ellen, she learned to heal and ask for help. As an advocate for people with dyslexia, which is a super ability, and Ellen will tell us why in a minute instead of thinking of it as a disability, Ellen strives to empower others to live their lives to the fullest. She's an advocate for women who have been abused as well. And her first book, Disempowered, chronicles her survival story of academic and domestic abuse. With all of that, welcome to Compassiviste Dialogues, Ellen. And I want to start with not a question, but to acknowledge your parents, because I've spoken to a few people from very extreme special needs situations, all the way to something that, like you say, is a super ability, not even a disability when you look at it the right way, dyslexia, right? And I've noticed a lot of the champion stories wasn't solely about the person I was interviewing or speaking with or anything like that. It really began with the resilience and the push and the adaptation and the fight and the vigor and everything that was in the parents that kind of drove the child to say I can, versus to accept the social status quo and all of that, especially so when they come from my generation or elder. Because I actually was speaking with somebody, a couple of days ago, and they're in a wheelchair, and they said to me, "I went to a school that was called, uh, you know, their local neighborhood, and then school for the crippled." And that was a term they used, but this person's 68 years old, and when we were speaking, I said, I know, even when I was younger, I mean, it's not too far, I mean, 30 years ago, we use terms that we understand, we don't use those, or society didn't accept people with any kind of, they had this norm, which they thought this is norm. And then if you deviated in any way from this norm, it was like defective in some way, right? And you were told you're defective, and your parents were told, take your child, have a good time, do whatever you want with them, and don't bring them to society. So when parents fight back, not so much today, because today we have wonderful people like yourself bringing stories, their self to the table and telling parents how to deal with this. But also we have institutionally changed in some ways to improve on this. And we don't alienate children anymore. We don't alienate adults. I mean, there are this person I was speaking with at 68 years old. He remembers when he was younger, and his friends used to pick him up because at university there were no ramps, and take him into the classroom and then come back, put him in his wheelchair. So, and this is just one generation before me, right? I mean, like just one group ahead of me at school. So, and to think today you have absolutely no, well, not absolutely, but you have really relatively or negligibly no access issues to go to a university, or at least a branded university like Harvard or something. I mean, they have the funding, they spend it, they put it. I can understand in developing worlds or some other places there may not be a ramp somewhere, but generally speaking, in the main schools, the accessibility issue has been really dealt with efficiently. So I want to start with a big thank you to your parents, because it's those people who enable people like yourselves to become this monster force for your advocacy.
Yeah, if they hadn't been the people that they were, I wouldn't have had a chance in hell.
Right? You know that better than me acknowledging it. I mean, you lived it, right?
Yeah, I did.
So let me just start there, because I think that's more profound for everybody who's listening or watching to understand that as a parent, there's so much you can do. There's so much you can do. So,
Yeah.
start sharing. Let's start with that sharing. How did your parents shape from the moment where the school's like, yeah, your child's no good? How did they react?
Well, there was a parent-teacher conference that my parents told me about when I was an adult, and it was, age appropriate, of course. And they were in a parent-teacher conference, and the administrator sat them down and said, well, your daughter is dyslexic. I'm very sorry. College is out of the question. She might be able to graduate from high school. But you should really focus on finding her a husband who will take care of her, because she won't be contributing to society other than as a wife and a mother. So find a good husband for her to take care of her. Now, I was 6 or 7 years old, and that parent-teacher conference ended with my mother pounding her fist on the desk saying, I refuse to allow you to condemn my daughter. So that's where it started.
And just for context, how many years back is this? Because that plays a big role.
It does. So I am 55. So this
50
was
years ago, half a century ago. Okay,
Yeah.
so I want people to go back half a century, and for the younger audience who are listening, Just
Yeah.
imagine you didn't have the rights you do today. Imagine you had none of the
Right.
privileges you do today, especially in this sphere. And we didn't even understand it or have education on it. Never mind
Yeah.
the the negativity that came around it. But just understand, half a century ago, a mother said no in the face of bureaucracy and the institution and school and the whole education board, because these people are speaking on behalf of a system. It's not their own personal choice. I mean, it's not like your principal or that person was like, I don't like Ellen. No, this is
Right.
how schools dealt with things. This was an
Right.
institutional response, and your
Right.
mom said, no, never mind the institution. We're gonna make sure she gets everything she wants, all the way to her master's degree.
Right. Right. And that's one of the reasons why I tell my story, and it's important because, and there are a lot of people who are my age or close to my age who have grown up dealing with being dyslexic, and, they still have low self-esteem. They still have that belief system inside of them, and it's inaccurate. I think the first thing to point out is that it's often viewed or was perceived as an intellectual disability.
Mm.
And in actuality, you have to have, in order to meet the criteria of being dyslexic, you have to have above average IQ. So it's very contradictory.
Right. But it tells
But
you so much about our society, right? I mean,
right,
the way we categorize things without having the education.
right, right. And yeah, and to your point, there was not a lot of understanding of what it means to be dyslexic. I think we're making strides, but there still is not a full understanding. And we don't, I think we understand maybe 10% of our own brain capacity. So, it is, yeah, it was very, very limiting. But to come back to my parents, my mother was, before she met my father, the highest ranked and the highest paid woman in Volkswagen. And she was responsible for the distribution of all the vehicles that came in from Germany to the mid-Atlantic states. And this was when the Bug or the Beetle was launched. So she was a very busy woman. And that was in the late 50s.
That's really impressive. Post-war era, where it was the beginning of this kind of movement of women kind of getting any kind of liberties. Even we're talking U.S. context, and it was new. So imagine the rest of the world, because this was a frontier world, right? This was where the pioneers came to happen. So for that to happen, now I understand your mom so much better. You should have said that at the opening sentence. Okay.
It is in the book.
Now I know her. Yeah, now I know her. Okay.
Yeah. So she was about 5'3", Irish Catholic from Brooklyn. And she was a tiger. She was a grizzly bear, and she was a mama grizzly bear. And my dad was an Army veteran, so he really understood the value of learning outside of the classroom. Hence, Outward Bound, skiing, my scuba certification, and he used to have this saying, and it was almost like a mantra. He had several mantras, and he'd say, "Everything I do for you girls has a reason. I want you girls to be able to handle whatever life throws at you, and I never want you to have to be dependent on a husband." And in the 1970s, that was not common.
No, I have a hard time trying to get that through some men's heads today. And you're talking some advanced feminism with your dad from, again. So they were a match in essence. I mean, especially to have an Army vet, come out and prepare you that way. That's something amazing. And now I can ask, how did those early experiences influence the empowering voice you bring to your work today? Because I assume you're getting a lot of your dad and a lot of you're like what you said about your mom, you're going to push through everything and the resilience there. And then from your dad, you're bringing in that ethics and and the discipline and the strength to do it, right?
Right.
How did that kind of form for you?
Well, I think it started with really a positive outlook and teaching me to believe in myself.
Mm-hmm.
He'd say to me all the time, especially when I'd be struggling through homework as a, first grader, second grader, third grader, I'd get frustrated and I'd throw my paper and my pencil across the room and, and he would say to me, Ellen, you can do it. You can do it.
Mm.
Prove him wrong. Prove him wrong. That was another mantra of his. Prove him wrong. Prove him wrong. You know you can. You know you can. And he was almost like a cheerleader in that way. And, and then also I grew up and we had a summer home on Fire Island, which is along the south shore of Long Island. And my dad was an avid sport fisherman. So we spent a lot of time on the ocean. And being in the outdoors is a learning opportunity. And he taught me about the environment. I used to have to stand on an upside down bucket so I could reach the steering wheel of his boat.
I'm imagining that. Okay.
Yeah. And I could just see over the bow and I could see the compass. And, those skills, learning how to navigate, learning how to read the water, learning how to read the ocean, learning to understand the wind and how the tides and everything interacts and creates that environment. That's also about being safe.
Mm-hmm.
It's about being safe. So these are important life skills that you don't get in a classroom. I was navigating when I was 8.
Yes, not a lot of kids are navigating at 10.
Exactly.
You see them throwing the ropes over and stuff like that and little things like that, but to actually give you that kind of education and that kind of empowerment, because I know as a child, when you're younger and your parents teach you these things like driving or, navigating a boat or anything like that, or even taking a helm on a little Cessna plane or something, for a moment, it's like, wow.
Yeah. It's very
You feel
empowering.
like you can achieve anything.
Yeah. And I used to ask him all the time because I'd sit there, I'd stand there and I'd be navigating, holding onto the steering wheel and, watching my heading on the compass and watching the buoys and making sure I was staying in the channel. And he would go and start to put fishing gear together, get things ready.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd ask him how am I doing? How am I doing? He's like,
Right.
Ellen, you're fine. Just stay on your heading, watch your buoys, watch for other, always be scanning the horizon for other boats. And he's like, you're doing great. Keep going. Keep doing it. Just stay on that heading. And when you get to the next buoy, you get to that, red can, you let me know and we'll look at another heading. So he was also an industrial instructor. So he had a very nice way of teaching and mentoring that was very supportive and empathetic.
And tell me a little about how your mom influenced you.
She was just tough. She was an example of being tough. And I think this came from both of them, but certainly, I think a little bit more from Mom, how to work through a problem, how to work through a challenge and break it down into small steps or what some people call micro goals.
Right.
So it taught me at a very early age to be very good at the long game.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't look at a bachelor's degree as 4 years of classes. You just focus on one semester.
And then next thing you know, you're getting ready for pictures for graduation.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the best way to do that. I know.
My dad used to say to me all the time, Ellen, one question at a time. One test question at a time. Just one at a time. That's all you have to do.
The more we're talking about this, the more I have to tell you, I can't stress how much parents and support groups and family can be the difference in a child's life under any circumstances. We're talking about dyslexia, but I often say this, whether you're speaking with, a parent of a child with leukemia, or you're speaking about someone who's quadriplegic and you're having a conversation with it, or it's dyslexia, or it's nothing. It's overcoming financial difficulties or poverty or something, being in that era. It's not the focus on the actual element that really ties everything together for me. It's more so the overcoming of the challenges, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, when you see repeating concepts in people overcoming challenges, and you repeatedly see a support group, specifically parents and siblings that are really there,
Mm-hmm.
you generally see this ability to overcome, right? And so I say it's I've also seen kids who didn't have any of that, and they were resilient, on another level and scale. But often there's been a lot of family support, and I'm really appreciative to the parents who do that, because in a very individualistic and kind of more of a Western philosophy, I also appreciate the fact that, say you're 22, you just gave birth, and your child, will have special needs, or may need something extra, and you may say, I'm not ready for this. I don't want the child. You have that option, available to you. It's not that you are forced to, or this is it. So it's amazing that, and I think that's the start of your journey. It's being lucky to be blessed with those parents.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of overcoming challenges, I want to take you to you've navigated significant life challenges, from, I guess, every day in school, and problems you had, and really the hardship of graduating, and all the way to your personal life, failed marriage. And how do those experiences transform your perspective on relationships and growth, in the sense of what lessons do you use today in your coaching, in a sense, to tell people, this is what happened in my marriage. These are, the things I learned from it, or these are the points that I bring out, and essentially, or your childhood, that you would say, not to list them all, but what would you say is the key connector of all these lessons in your life that put you in a place where you can say, I can help you?
I think the first thing is not to be afraid of a challenge, no matter what it looks like. And I actually love challenges now and look for ways to challenge myself. I think that this idea that we're going to get married, have our 2.5 kids, and you're going to have your job, and your life is going to be, simple and sweet, and everything's going to be perfect, is not realistic. Life is full of challenges. We are all on our own individual journey. And I believe we're here to learn and grow. And, a lot of what we talk about in coaching is getting clarity on somebody's purpose.
Mm.
And when you can identify your purpose and see your life as a journey, it doesn't feel so painful anymore.
It all becomes part of the build to that purpose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I often use very historical references, because people know the stories, whether they've seen a Disney remake of it, or religious story of it. But it's kind of like when you think back to Noah's Ark story, and you think, had he not had the spiritual insight to building the ark and a purpose for it, would he have toiled that much to make the story happen? Now, whether fable, real, you don't believe it, whatever, it doesn't matter. The story goes, he builds this massive structure, and everybody's bullying him and harassing him and laughing at him, and even his own family. And then he's bringing all these animals, and he's really, taking all of this on his own. But he doesn't quit. He doesn't quit through the whole thing. And for me, that story is exactly what you're saying. It's when you understand your purpose, and when you can see it clearly, and there's no veil, for you to be like, why is this happening to me? You're kind of appreciative of every stone that turns in front of you, right? And,
Exactly.
and you take that in beautifully. Now, how did you reach a place speaking of purpose, how did you reach a place of knowing that there is purpose, or that you can find your purpose, or any of that? Because that goes into a completely different zone. That goes into a spiritual understanding of one's existence, so to speak. There are a lot of people in the world who they get so tied up. I myself, I speak of this from experience. I was so tied up in my financial success and the history of my financial success that nothing mattered at one point. And then I crashed. I crashed because it was no longer giving me joy, because I had no purpose. Even my money had no purpose. It was just piling up. And there was not, like, after, you buy the house, you buy the car, you buy, and then there's nothing more to buy. It becomes very depressing, right? Because you have nothing to purposefully use progress to, in a sense. That was your progress, and you hit the end. It's kind of like reaching the end of the game. And you're like, what do I do now? What do I do with my whole PlayStation and the game and the TV? What do I do? Right? It's useless to me now because I finished it. I hit that spot because I had no purpose, which was, to me, in retrospect, great that I hit it at an early age, because I was able to transition and find purpose, right? So how was it for you? How did you get to a place where, and how do you explain that to people? Because I still have a hard time explaining to people how to find your purpose. But I ask people because one day I know somebody's going to say something that will resonate with everyone.
Right. Well, I have kind of a long answer for you, but
yes, I love that.
Okay. So after I escaped from my ex-husband, and I literally had to plan and execute an escape, I was trying to put my life back together, and just nothing was going right for me. And I was traumatized. I was driving through stop signs and red lights. I was so traumatized. And I reached my surrender point. I just looked up at the sky and said, I don't know what else to do. I'm turning myself over to you. And that instant, things started to get better. I started to feel better. I started to realize I had a connection with a higher power that I wasn't even aware of. It was kind of like I was stumbling around in a dark room trying to find a light switch. The electricity's always there. You just got to flip the light switch on and say, okay, there's a connection. There's a connection. So in the span of 1 year, so I escaped January 23rd as my escape anniversary. The following, I reached my surrender point, started to work with a counselor, a coach. And that December, my mother was in an accident that she did not survive. So in the span of a year, I went through all of that. And it is in my book. And my mother went Christmas shopping, and she was in the crosswalk and she was hit by a truck. She received a compressed skull fracture. And 3 days later, we donated her organs when she was declared brain dead.
Sorry to hear that.
Thank you. I'm grateful that she was able to be an organ donor, because she was able, her last act on this earth was to save the life of a man who received her liver. And 2 people got their vision back because her corneas were transplanted as well. So it was shocking. And it was after that point.
Sorry. And I have to say, it's so difficult because, when someone says my mom had cancer and it gradually, but then in the same span of the year, she passed away, like, you're building up to it, right? Whereas mom's Christmas shopping, you're expecting Christmas, and then you get a phone call saying this, right? It's whoa. And you're going through all of what you're going through for 11 months already. Like,
right.
I'm taking all of that into context.
Yeah, it's a lot. And I forget how shocking the story is, because it's so much part of my story right now. And I'm used to it, for lack of a better term. But it was after that, a few months after that, and things kept getting better, went through grieving, obviously all of that. I was then taking care of my dad. I took care of him for 5 years. Now, he did not need a lot of care. He was, still fishing, driving, had a great social life. He adjusted really well after we lost my mom. But he just couldn't be alone. He had a pacemaker defibrillator in his chest. He needed somebody to go to appointments. He needed somebody to cook for him. Otherwise, he would have eaten pizzas and burgers all the time. So not really good for, somebody who's 70 plus. But it was a few months after that, as I'm processing all of this and working with a counselor, that I realized I had survived something pretty incredible. And I had learned a lot. And what I learned was really valuable. And I felt this huge sense of responsibility to share what I have learned. And that gave all of my trauma and suffering meaning, because now I had answers. I had answers: how to persevere, how to be resilient, how to heal, how to ask for help, how to move through these things. And I think there's something that a lot of people don't understand, is that you may be a survivor of something really catastrophic. And that is amazing in itself. But then what? Then you have to learn how to thrive. And that's the next step. And that's something I've learned how to do. I've moved from survivor to thriver. And that's why I wrote my book, and that's why I coach, and that's why I tell my story to people like you in your audience.
And believe me, I've learned to take your story and build it into my story, because I've learned that at first, I'm going to be a little transparent. At first, it wasn't like that. Many years ago, when I would hear a story that didn't resonate with mine or didn't relate very closely to me, I would say, but that's not my story. Or, this person speaking from a space of, a shark bit their leg off and now, they don't have a leg. Their life changed. I can't relate to that, Then slowly listening to more and trying to find connection. And as the compassion builds, I started saying, oh, that's me, but I didn't have the leg amputation. I had this, but it's the same thing, because I'm dealing with my own issues, and how this person overcame, I could use that to overcome in my issues. So again, it's not a matter, had I not introduced you as dyslexic and we just had this conversation, nobody would have known what it is that it started from and where it reached, but they would see all of the overcoming of the challenges and stuff. So I always tell people, don't focus on that. Focus on how the development happened, right? Yes. And that's really the journey from struggle to empowerment. You even overcoming, like you said, leaving the marriage, being able to escape, all of that is the struggle, right? A lot of people may be able to reach that point, but that point is still very dark, very painful, very traumatic, very all sorts of negatives attached to it. It's just a separate set of negatives than the first one. So someone may be in an abusive relationship and their fear is, getting beaten that day, but then they escape that. And then they have a whole another set of things like, where do I sleep tonight? I have to find a shelter, or, it's not thriving, as you say. But then there comes a point where you take all of that and you turn it into positivity, and you turn it into, a faithful purpose, so to speak, which is, what you're doing. And now in doing that, I want to ask you something that really helped me. So I want to hear your part of it. How's writing become the tool for you to do this? And the reason I ask is because I find when people use art, any form of art, as a medium of exchange of their expression of their minds, it's not really read the book, it's a cool story. It's more like, here's my mind, I'm sharing it with you because we don't have this telepathic situation going on, and I can't just dump my information into your head
Right.
in a second. Here's the form that I can do it in. And what is that form? That form is by me giving you a book that you can read through, that you can understand me, or here's a video I made, or here is a film, or here is a painting, or whatever medium that is, right? So you've chosen writing, and it's difficult for me to wrap my head around because of the dyslexia as well. So how did that become your gateway? Because I would assume it would be another art form.
Right. Well, you know what? I played the long game, and I took my time, and I found resources. I found support. I worked with, what that looks like for me is I worked with a writing coach.
Mm-hmm.
It was not a ghostwriter. It was a writing coach. And we just took it one chapter at a time. And I worked for good 4 or 5 years on it. And it just became part of my routine to write and tell this story and to rewrite it. Sometimes that was really hard, especially talking about painful experiences. But at the same time, it was very cathartic, and it gave me a lot of clarity on what I experienced and what I learned. And it was so interesting because I was very frightened for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
when I was getting towards the end of the book, because I really put myself out there. I mean, I am authentic. I am, in some cases, raw, and really share some very private moments. And I kept asking myself, do I really want to do this? Do I really want to do this? I was doing some group coaching. I was a coachee, not the coach.
Mm-hmm.
And that group really supported me through that process. And then my publisher, who was wonderful, she supported me through that process as well. You may have heard of her. Her name is Jessica Buchanan, and she is focused on raising up women's voices. Now, she doesn't just work exclusively with women, but Jessica is a kidnapping survivor. She was working for an NGO in Somalia in 2012, and she was kidnapped, held ransom, held for 93 days, and President Obama sent in SEAL Team 6 to go get her. So
I don't know her. I know the story.
yes,
I think a lot of people know the story. When you say the name, everybody's like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah,
But not that I have or have ever met her, but yes.
yeah. So
Okay.
obviously
So
she's
there's a lot of resilience and like strength in that group. I mean, yourself
yes,
with your backstory, her and whoever else is there as well, coming in with their stories. So this is like a X-Men kind of group, like the film, right? I mean, you guys are there with these like superpowers
yeah,
of resilience and strength and adaptability and all these qualities that we have, but we're just not in touch with in the proper ways that we should be.
right,
And
right,
that's where the book comes from. It comes from
yes,
that kind of center.
yeah.
Okay.
And Jess is very supportive of her authors, because
Mhm.
to put yourself out there is scary, and authors need support. And she
Mhm.
was wonderful, and it was so interesting because we got to the point where the book was done, and Amazon prints up 2 copies, and they send one to the publisher and one to the author. And then you get to look through it. It's not for resale. It's just,
Mhm.
you need to make sure that like the pages are numbered correctly. It's the final edit. And I remember I came home from skiing, and it was at my door, and I opened it
Mhm.
up, and all of a sudden I was holding it in my hands. I had it in my hands. It was real. And I was just stunned for like 2 weeks. I was trying to process it. And it was so interesting. So Jess and I are talking back and forth, and she's asking, how are you feeling? What's happening? What's going on with you? And I sent her back a 2-word email. And my 2-word email was, I won. I beat Everybody
Mm.
who said I wasn't capable, good enough, smart enough, whatever they said.
That's your dad's mantra. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
won.
And that's how, that's how I tell people, influential people don't die. They live on. And that's your dad's
Yeah,
voice through that email and for years to come. And as long as that book sits on a shelf,
yeah,
that's that voice I want.
yeah. I had 200 plus pages of proof.
Yeah.
Proof. And the other thing too is that I never quit on myself. That's another really important point I think people need to realize. Don't give up.
And when you say don't give up, I want people to understand, it's easy not to give up in the easy spaces.
Right.
And people give up in the difficult spaces that they don't even calculate it as giving up. They say, I couldn't make it, or I didn't make it, or I failed, or it ended, or so. That's giving up to me. That's where the strength comes in, because you could do anything you set your mind to, really, honestly, truly. I believe that, right?
Yeah.
But you need to overcome challenges that are outrageous, not look, if you and I go for a marathon, we're both making the first 100 meters. Okay. There's no way we're falling off the first 100 meters. But are we going to make it 3/4 ways through? That's
Right.
the don't quit part for me. It's
Right.
not after the first 100 meters, like, oh my God, I broke a sweat. I can't, I quit.
Right.
That's soft. But then
Right.
as you go, it gets harder and harder. But there will come a time that you didn't pass or cross the finish line, and you
Right.
stopped and you thought you can't anymore. But
Mm-hmm.
in really, in people's cases that persevere beyond that limit and level, your legs give out, you're crawling to the finish line.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the people who become your story.
Yeah.
Because for the life of me, I was reading about you, and I was like, how did she write a book? Am I understanding things wrong? Is this not to do with dyslexia? Like, how does that happen? And then I was like, wow, these are the miracles of the world. When we're so hung up on proving Jesus walked on water. And I'm like, okay, let that go for a minute. There's somebody right here in front of me who shouldn't be able to write, who wrote a book.
Yeah.
That itself is something like that for me, right? So
Yeah.
it empowers me. It makes me feel like, okay, I'm getting up tomorrow. I'm Superman tomorrow. So
Mm-hmm.
thank you for bringing that really to the table. Now I want to ask you something, so that
Sure.
people have more awareness, education, and understanding, because I feel like, um, we know a lot of terms sometimes, but we know nothing about the terms that we use, because people throw, for example, the word autism around, right? And they throw it around so casually, but you ask one layer of depth of a question and everybody's stunned because they don't know. They just learned, that what they saw on Instagram or something. But give me a little more information about dyslexia. What do we know? What do we not know? What are we working on? Where is the,
Yeah.
solutions that we're looking at?
There's a number of different ways to look at it, and it also depends on who you talk to.
Mm.
What is their perspective? So I like the term neurodivergent because my mom used to say to me as a little girl, it's so obvious that you're an intelligent, capable child. It's like they don't know how to teach you.
Mm.
And I think she was really onto something there. And I have spent a lot of time trying to understand my own brain because I had to find a way to fit into a classroom that wasn't designed for me.
Yes.
So I had to find tricks and methodologies and just ways that I could learn. And what I've come to understand for myself, and everybody's a little bit different. I'm a very visual thinker, and I have a theory that language is not our first language. We think in pictures. We think in images, often three-dimensional. A lot of dyslexic people are engineers, and I like to say it's like we're born with CAD software in our heads. So I can take an image, I can take this mouse, I can picture it, I can rotate it all in my brain, I can take it apart, I can put it back together. That's a talent.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a disability.
No.
So I think that there is a process that we have to go through where we have to learn language, but it's a second language. Language is a second language to us. So I think that's a piece of what's going on. Some experts will call it a processing issue, processing visually words, numbers, and that's how they identify it.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a component of that is accurate. But here's another interesting piece, and again, this is individual to me, is that I was originally diagnosed as ambidextrous.
Mm.
And I started to show tendency towards using my left hand. So they said, okay, you're left-handed.
Mm.
But then when I got to puberty, I started using my right hand more. And my parents and my teachers were like, no, that could be really bad if she switches dominance. We don't know what's going to happen. So let's just encourage her to stay left-handed. And you know what? I don't know what the answer is. My mom was doing everything she could for me. So I don't see a detriment or a negative there at all. And what's interesting is as I've moved to this point in my life, I spend a lot of time doing meditation, a lot of time yoga, somatic movement, and I find I'm using my right hand much more.
Mm.
In fact, I did some training with Commander Mark Devine, who is a retired Navy SEAL. He has a civilian training program where we talk about micro goals, resiliency, mental toughness, all of those things. And one part of a training that I attended was some firearms training. I'm not a gun enthusiast, not interested in owning a gun. But one of the things my father wanted from me was to know how to safely handle a firearm. Just makes sense. Everybody should know how to safely handle a firearm.
Yes.
It's a good thing. So I go to this training and I'm shooting left-handed and using my left eye, and I can't hit the side of a barn. What I come to find out from other subsequent training is that my right eye is dominant.
Mm.
So I have a lot of questions about the left and right hemispheres and dyslexia, and what does that really mean? And I would even question, maybe it's just my ambidextrous mind is showing up this way, and it's just how I process information. It's just really interesting, and it's a puzzle that I'm always trying to find more pieces to to understand it. I find it fascinating.
And I'm also thinking it's also a matter of the way we allocate resources and the way we deal with things, because the reality of society today is very capitalistic, even in places where it shouldn't be, right? And so maybe it's easier to put you in a box than to build a new box, right?
Exactly.
So I see that happening a lot because we think, the institutions and the funding and the grants and everything else goes towards the majority need. So, what is really needed now? Well, you know what, if we can come up with new tech for cancer, that would really sell. Okay. How much money is left? $50. Where do we put that? Let's put that in dyslexia research.
Right.
What's that going to do? Nothing.
Right.
And so, it falls behind. I mean, I've heard of cases and names of things like type 3 OI, osteogenesis. I can't interfecta, I think. But whatever, type 3 OI, brittle bones, essentially, right? People who break their bones easily. There's about only 50,000 people in the world with that. So, when I'm speaking to somebody with that, having brittle bones, and I ask them this question, and they respond much like you in the sense of, well, I have more research and I have more credentials to know what really should be talked about and what it is and what it isn't, because there is no immense amount of research and immense amount of science behind it, or from the context of people who have been able to overcome and thrive, and to reach out to them and see what's going on. And much of the research is done through patients. And when they say patients, it means people that they're using as lab people.
Yep.
So, if your parents would have said, okay, fine, we'll find her a good husband, we'll leave her at home, they would have chosen you as that person to do testing on and say, and you would have, fallen perfectly in the box they would have wanted, because there is no way of kind of encouraging you to overcome, to see what your limits are, what you can or cannot process or do. So they just write it up, and it's over.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad you explained it the way you do, because it really it can help a lot of people understand themselves and what they've been, quote unquote, diagnosed with.
Yeah.
That's a weird term for me when somebody says,
Yeah.
the diagnosis thing. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
how do you know exactly? Like, what do we know exactly when we don't even know we don't even know what the mind is. We know what the brain is. We're still in a philosophical conversation of the mind that we were from 4,000 years ago. So, how are you explaining this to me from a medical perspective, which you don't even understand? So it really gets me sometimes. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you explained it in this way.
Yeah. And to your point, the diagnosis is actually, it's a double-edged sword, because legally somebody who is diagnosed as dyslexic is legally handicapped. So you have that label right there.
Mm-hmm.
There it is. Might as well
And why?
right.
Yeah,
Now,
but why?
the advantage, or what's critical, is that once you fall under the Americans with Disabilities Act, because you have this handicap
Yeah.
diagnosis, you are now protected by those laws.
Mm.
And the schools must make reasonable accommodations to support that student. So and that costs money. That's expensive.
Yes.
And I know of a school district, I won't say where, but it is in the United States. And there is a school district where I happen to know a person who works within that district and is part of the special needs program, if you will. She is not allowed to use the word dyslexic or dyslexia, because this particular school district fights against diagnosing these children, because then they have to pay for their accommodations. That is happening today in the United States. That is real.
Yeah,
And
that hurts.
she was told if she uses those terms, she will be fired because of what it'll cost the school district. Yeah, talk about double whammy.
Yeah, you know what though? And the thing is, like, I try to be so understanding to circumstances. Like, if we were sitting in a poverty-stricken country right now and we were having this conversation, I would start advocating for, okay, you know what? I can understand that, because there's so many needs and there's so many children who have such massive needs. Like, you may need to roll someone in with their heart monitor and everything else. It's really hard. Dyslexic, you could do everything. I mean, it's not that much of an issue, whatever. We only have $5. We need to give it to the child who's almost dying if we don't, right? But
Right.
you're in a land of abundance, and all these other districts are, but then the issue of money comes in places that it shouldn't, just like I brought up earlier. And then it just keeps us behind. It's not innovative. It's not progressive. It's not reaching the next level, because here we are creating tech that 20 years ago, we wouldn't even understand what we're talking about today. Like, if you mentioned the stuff we're doing today in tech 20 years ago, people would have a hard time even fathoming what's going on. Yet we're like, let's hide the dyslexia. Let's figure out a way to save money on this one, which is pretty sad.
Yeah. I went to, and it's kind of interesting. So I grew up in an affluent community, which had excellent school systems. It was a New York City suburb, and they had the money and they had the support, but it was still, there was such a bias against me that I would never amount to anything. or just wasn't capable, I wonder if I would have been better off not having been diagnosed. I wonder. And I don't know the answer. I'd say
You're
probably not.
right. I never even thought about that. You're right. If you were just not diagnosed and, I don't know, you made some extra spelling mistakes or something, like, okay, whatever, right?
Right.
That would have been it. Like, your daughter can't spell, and that would have been it. But how, would you have fared better off socially? Because the label is not just at the school level, it's also with the students, with your friends, with your circles, peers, social, everywhere you want to get a job. Like, it follows you everywhere. That label follows you everywhere, right? And not everybody is going to be, not everybody's going to be like, oh, I get it, this doesn't mean anything. Everybody's going to be like, oh, that's a disability case, or
Right.
that's, and they just judge you right off the bat. So
Exactly.
it's so difficult to get over all of those things. And
one of the most important experiences I had was when I was 15 and went on Outward Bound. So, and the reason is I wasn't a dyslexic student on Outward Bound. I was just a student. And that was the first time in my life I got to get away from that label. And guess what happened? I was put in a leadership position and I thrived because I was so good at reading the water and reading the ocean. I did a 2-week rafting trip. I was a natural piloting that raft. And I led my boat crew. And it was natural. It was easy. It was an environment that I thrived in. Those 2 weeks changed the entire trajectory of my life. And because I got to be just a regular student for 2 weeks, it was amazing. Nobody knew I was dyslexic. No one. And it didn't matter. When you're hiking and climbing and rappelling, and it doesn't matter. When I led the group, I did it well. I'm 15 years old, rappelled a 110-foot cliff, led my boat crew through class 4 and 5 rapids. That is why my father sent me on that trip, because he knew I was going
you have it in you. Yeah.
He knew I was going to thrive.
Right.
And I came home swinging, just ready for the next challenge.
Yes, and imagine what that does to you in terms of your confidence and your, you're like, I can do this. I'm gonna do this. I'm excelling here, and so, it's really beautiful. I was actually going to ask you about that because I read a little bit of that story before us speaking, and what I wanted to say is, aside from the impact it had on you, sometimes I get so discouraged by nonprofits because, you read about the corruption, you read about the nonsense work, you read about some things that don't encourage you. And then, the public loses trust and all those things. But then sometimes you read about places like Outward Bound USA, right? And how they impacted you and how, they really gave you a part of that lifeline that you were able to excel through your life also came there. Like, when I look through your life and chapters, your parents fill a chapter for me. This experience fills a chapter for me, right? And there's some good people who are doing some good things that allow people to, get those stepping stones. And
exactly,
it becomes so inspiring to see that there are organizations like this. How did you get involved there? Like, did your dad know about them, or was it just random? How did you guys get to pick that?
Oh, he knew about it. And he said, You're going. He said, you're going. Pick which trip you want to go on. And he let me pick it, but I was thrilled. I was like, well, yeah, I want to go do that. And so it wasn't like it was something I didn't want to do. I wanted to go. And he was just like, you're going. And I had just turned 15. So that was the youngest that they would take us.
Okay.
At that time.
You were a leader.
Yeah. And now I think they had programs for kids as young as 12, but a parent or a guardian had to accompany them on Sure.
Right.
So I don't know how it is today, but it was the
Okay.
first year they did trips for 14 and 15-year-olds. So,
Exciting.
yeah.
Now, your education. How did you navigate that? I mean, after school, how were you able to go through the day to day of schooling and education, being that, like you said, you have that label following you, and how did the schools kind of react to that? How hard was it?
It was grueling. I mean, I had teeth grinding grit. I was determined and I was angry. I was a very angry child being treated this way because I knew it was wrong.
Yes.
I knew they were wrong about me, and I just wasn't going to quit. And I just went to my long game strategy.
Mm-hmm.
One semester at a time, one class at a time, one question at a time. And I had that never ending support at home too.
Yes.
So they just supported me and I just worked through it. There were times I had to work 2-3 times harder than my classmates. And there were times where it was maddening. It was, just so frustrating. And I just learned how to survive in that classroom. I found tricks and ways that I could memorize things. So one of the characteristics of somebody that I experience is I have little to no short-term memory, but my long-term memory is off the charts excellent. So anytime I'm memorizing something for a test, I have to commit it to long-term memory. And I do that by repetition.
Okay.
I just repetition. And like I said, my long-term recall is just amazing. So once it's in there, it's permanent.
It just
I
has to
also,
get to the long-term side.
exactly. So that's where I would have to work extra hard. Another example of a trick that I learned when I took anatomy and earning my bachelor's degree. My bachelor's is in allied health. I had to take anatomy and physiology. And we had to memorize all the muscles and all the bones in the human body, which is not easy to do.
No. That's why I never went to med school.
Yeah, it's not easy. So there's actually a anatomy coloring book out there.
Mm-hmm.
So you may have seen it, and the words are kind of bubbled. So you color in the muscle, and all my friends and we all had the same book, and you'd color in the muscle, and then you'd color in the bubbled word. So I learned to associate the color with the muscle or the bone. So that was another trick that I learned. So there was a lot of tricks like that I learned that helped me. Definitely, dyslexic people are known for being creative thinkers, and that's a great example. That was a great tool for me.
You navigated school like when I was very young. There was this TV show my dad used to watch, and if I was around, I'd see it. It was called MacGyver. And this guy, he'd be in the middle of nowhere and he'd find a way to make fire, a house, a car, everything right out of sticks. And you're like, how?
Yeah.
And he just somehow made it happen. Right. And you started to remind me of that because you find you find the key and the way out to every situation you get put in a sense, because you're like, I don't quit. It's that MacGyver mentality for me, right? It's like, I don't quit. MacGyver was the same. He never died. He never fell, into the problems or anything, because there was always that last minute effort of rubbing two sticks and something happened and he got away. So you're reminding me a lot of that.
Well, I think there's actually, kind of a term out there that people use, like, oh, he or she MacGyvered it.
Yeah. There you go. You MacGyvered everything from childhood all the way through your sports and the camps and the school and the education and your personal life. And where are you now? I mean, are you happy? Are you like, how do you feel right now? Do you feel like you're on cloud nine, or do you feel like there's still spaces you want to go? What are you fighting for? Tell me about you now, right now. Who's Ellen right now?
I'm great. I live in Colorado, and all winter long I ski the Rockies. So life is good. Life is really good. I took on another challenge. I am learning telemark skiing, which is a different kind of alpine skiing. It is your heel is not fixed to the ski the way a normal alpine ski is.
Okay.
So each turn is actually a lunge. So you bend a knee and you lunge for each turn, and then you go back and forth.
Okay.
Which is incredibly difficult to learn. But I'm so comfortable being challenged. It is my normal. So I'm always taking on challenges. I have a wonderful group of friends.
You're now looking for challenges. That's the beautiful part of it. Like, as opposed to escaping challenges that are thrown on your plate, you're now in such a Zen state, if you will, that you are like, okay, I need a challenge. I need to go out and find a challenge, as opposed to I'm escaping my marriage. I'm fighting this. I'm fighting that. It's no longer like that. You're in a beautiful place, and you're like, I want to go do more with skiing.
Exactly. So it's being challenged is my normal, and even when it's been painful, it always comes with growth and excitement and learning new things. And I love that. I'm very curious. My number one personality trait when I took a personality test was curiosity.
Okay.
So it's my normal to be in a challenge. And when I'm not in it, being challenged by something, I actually get bored. So at 53, I decided to learn how to telemark ski. And most people would tell me I was crazy. But I'm doing it. And it takes 3 years to learn and to convert over. And I'm just about where I want to be. So this is my 3rd season.
Perfect.
So it's coming along. Yep.
Good luck on that.
Thank you.
If you were to use a single word or a short sentence to give that to people to just keep in the back of their heads for when things get rough, what would that be? Because you come from a sailing background too, and I have sailor friends. They don't panic when I panic, because when I go in the water with them and the boat goes sideways, I'm saying my prayers, because I think that's it, we're done. But then they're so calm, and they know it's not, and they have things together, and they know when to pull the sail down and up and sideways and stuff, and how to tie it and all those things. I don't. So for me, it's kind of like, panic, because I don't understand. So what would you say? What would that word be for you to support people through it?
I would go back to what I learned, but didn't really know that I learned. And this comes from Mark Devine, the retired Navy SEAL who I've done extensive training with. We are 20 times more capable than we realize we are.
I will attest to that. You're so right. Yeah. We see it physically, and we see it mentally. I saw a person, my own eyes, not YouTube or anything, my own eyes, lift a pickup truck off of somebody on a motorbike that they got into an accident. And I didn't see the accident, but it happened the car in front of me, and that was the person in that car. The guy came out, run to the scene, and just lifted this truck just barely enough that the person was stuck underneath and screaming, to just pulled themselves back. And I was reaching to try to be of assistance. And when I looked at that moment, I didn't understand what happened. But when everything calmed down, I looked at this person, and he was half my size. I'm not kidding you. He was half my size. And the strength that came out of this person. And then I said, there's no way this just happened. I went to the car. I went to the truck, right? And I'm trying to pull it up, and it's not budging. It's not even like moving, on the ground, on nothing. It's stuck, like it's glued onto the pavement. on the street. And at that moment, I was like, wow, how much more can we do that we're not doing? I really said that, because I was like, how much more can I bench press that I don't think I can, because I have this block in my head of some sort. And how much stronger am I then in my mind everywhere else? Like,
Yeah.
I'm so weak compared to who I should be in essence. And then, like you say, life throws these curveballs and you're hitting them, you're home running all of them. And then you're like, ooh, okay, I could do this. Right. And then the confidence builds and then you become your own superhero and then you believe in yourself, and it's amazing. It's amazing. So yeah, we are going to, you're 20 times stronger than you think you are. That is a sentence that's going to stay with me.
Yes.
Can you show us your book? I want people to see your book. I want people, they go into a bookstore, they see that, remember this image, buy that book, because there's a lot in that book.
There is a lot in here. And it's also on Audible.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah. So
you can listen to it.
Yes, especially for dyslexic folks who, struggle to read. That was one of the reasons why I did the audiobook.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
Is it your voice? Did you do the audiobook?
No.
You got someone do it? Okay.
I had a professional narrator, and here's the reason why. Is there is one deficit that I do struggle with. Reading out loud is very difficult for me.
Okay.
And I knew I'm very choppy as I read out loud. Obviously, I speak well, but the reading part just, I knew it wasn't going to be professional.
Right.
And I wasn't going to put something out there that wasn't professionally done.
I've written a lot of books, and I've been asked to read my own book. I started reading one of them to be like, okay, fine. I'll start with book 1 of 22. And I started the first chapter and I heard myself and I was like, oh God, this is awful. And, and then that's when you learn there's all these like sounds that you make when you read that you don't know you're making those sounds that aren't reading right. Like, because when people hear it, you can't make the S's sound so S or P or something. And you got to basically take a course. And I said, never mind, onto the professional, please. And that was the end of my career at Audible. So I know I will not save my life if I had to do this. So we're in the same boat. Don't worry.
Thank you. And I'm super pleased with the narrator. I think she did a wonderful job, and so I'm grateful to her too.
Perfect. Ellen, thank you very much for speaking on Compassiviste Dialogues. This was awesome. And thank you for teaching us that there are literally no limits but what we impose on ourselves personally, individually, and collectively or socially. Your resilience and force, it's not that it's inspiring, it's more because it's activating. Inspiring is Jesus' story. Inspiring is some historical Disney character that, I want to use as, my power floor or something. But you're sitting right in front of me and you're an average person. You don't have wings. You're not Spider-Man. You don't have webs, shooting out. So I can't attribute any of that to you. I can't be like, of course she did, because, she's got webs coming out of her wrists. Like that would be different, right? Then I could be inspired that you're using your webs to goodness and helping the world and all of that. But I don't get activated because I'll always turn around and say, but that's Spider-Man, right? Like I can't do that. But when I look at you and I look at myself and I see myself reflected in you, I say, if she can do it, I can do it, because look, it's Ellen. It's a normal person sitting in front of me. Like, she's just a normal human like anybody else, which makes it worse, because if she went through all of that and came out shining here and I didn't, I should really push myself to